My father stared straight into my eyes and said, "You're a fraud," right there in front of everyone at my grandmother's will reading. My mother leaned forward, her face twisted with disgust, and added, "I regret ever giving birth to such an ungrateful child." The words hit harder than anything I'd ever felt. The room went dead silent. No one defended me. No one even looked surprised. I'm Jenna Burke. For years, I was the only one who showed up for my grandmother Ruth, the one who sat with her through the confusion, the forgotten names, the long nights. I thought that meant something. But that day, in the sleek living room of her Silicon Valley mansion with the lawyer, calmly flipping through papers, it felt like my entire family had already decided I was guilty. They didn't just question my right to anything, they accused me of manipulating a sick old woman for money. The lawyer, Mr. Ellison, paused and said quietly, "Ruth Burke prepared for this meeting. In a way, none of you are expecting." That was all he said. No explanation. No hint of what was coming. And honestly, I had no idea either. If you want to know how everything flipped that day, how the people who raised me turned on me, and what my grandmother had really planned, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications like this video, and drop a comment below. You won't believe what happened next. The late afternoon sun streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Silicon Valley mansion, casting sharp reflections across the modern living room and making the space feel bright, yet oddly cold. White leather sofas were arranged in a loose semicircle around a low glass coffee table that held only the lawyer's open briefcase and a few neat stacks of documents. A large flat-screen television hung on one wall, its surface dark and blank, reflecting the room back at us like a silent witness. Mr. Ellison, the attorney my grandmother had trusted for decades, sat at the head of the setup. He was calm, expressionless, the kind of professional who could read devastating news without blinking. I sat on a smaller chair slightly off to the side, close enough to hear every word, but far enough to feel like an outsider in my own family's gathering. Across from me, my father, Alan Burke, occupied the center of the longest sofa. His arms were folded tightly across his chest, and every few minutes his eyes flicked down to the watch on his wrist, as if time itself was something he could control or hurry along. Next to him, my mother, Cynthia Burke, kept running her fingers through her perfectly styled hair. Her lips stayed pressed together, thin and tense, like she was holding back a comment she had already rehearsed in her head. My younger brother, Dylan Burke, sat on the opposite sofa, with his wife, Sarah Burke, pressed close against his side. The two of them leaned in occasionally, exchanging quick, quiet words I couldn't quite make out, over the low hum of the air conditioning. In the far corner, my Aunt Valerie Hart, my mother's younger sister, perched on the edge of her seat. She held a crumpled tissue in one hand and kept dabbing at the corners of her eyes, even though no tears had actually fallen. Every so often she glanced in my direction, then quickly dropped her gaze to her lap. Mr. Ellison cleared his throat, once adjusted his glasses, and began reading in a measured, even tone that filled the room completely. To my son, Alan Burke, I leave the sum of $300,000 along with the vintage automobile collection currently housed in the lower garage. My father gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His posture didn't change, but the grip of his crossed arms loosened just a fraction before tightening again. Mr. Ellison turned the page without pause. To my daughter-in-law, Cynthia Burke, I leave $250,000 in cash and the pearl necklace with matching earrings, as well as the sapphire bracelet passed down from my own mother. My mother paused mid-motion, her hand frozen in her hair. She exhaled through her nose a short, sharp sound, then resumed smoothing the strands as if nothing had happened. The lawyer continued. To Valerie Hart, I leave the condominium property located in Palm Springs, California for her personal use during her lifetime, after which title will revert to the family trust. Valerie pressed the tissue to her cheek and murmured, "That was kind of Ruth. in a soft voice that carried a hint of surprise, as though she had expected something different. Mr. Ellison flipped another page. To my grandson Dylan Burke, I leave $100,000 to be held in a restricted educational trust. Funds will be released only upon presentation of proof of continuous employment or completion of an accredited program for a minimum of 12 consecutive months. Dylan's shoulders rose and fell in a quick breath. Sarah leaned closer, her lips moving near his ear. I caught only the end of her whisper. Only that much. My father glanced at his watch again. My mother let out a quiet but unmistakable sigh. Valerie shook her head slowly and said under her breath, just loud enough for the room to hear. Ruth couldn't have meant for it to stop here. The silence stretched for several long seconds. No one shifted uncomfortably. Everyone simply waited, calculating, measuring what had been said against what they believed should have been said. Sarah whispered again, a little bolder this time. There has to be more. Dylan placed a calming hand on her knee, but his own expression had hardened. Mr. Ellison lifted the next page, the paper rustling sharply in the quiet. Before he could begin reading again, Dylan rose abruptly from the sofa. His face was flushed, eyes narrowed, voice cutting through the room like a blade. Hold on a second, he said, the words tight and angry. Before you read another line, we need to settle something important right now. Dylan shot up from the sofa, his finger pointing directly at me like an accusation that had been waiting for this exact moment. We can't let this continue, he said, his voice sharp and unwavering. Jenna exploited Grandma's Alzheimer's to trick her into signing documents that completely altered the will. She took advantage of someone who wasn't in her right mind anymore. Sarah immediately backed him up, her tone confident and pointed. I witnessed it more than once. Jenna would arrive with thick folders and stacks of papers, staying for hours after Grandma had dozed off. There's no telling what she convinced her to sign when the house was empty and quiet. My father leaned forward on the sofa, his presence commanding as always. Do you honestly believe I wouldn't see what you were doing behind everyone's back? I'm her only son, the one who should inherit the bulk of everything she built. Not someone who wormed her way in at the last minute. My mother's eyes blazed with a mix of anger and betrayal. You're nothing but ungrateful and selfish. All those visits, all that supposed care, it was just an act to grab everything for yourself. You've stolen what rightfully belongs to the real family. Valerie spoke softly from her corner, her voice laced with false concern. Jenna, sweetheart, I only wish you'd think about the family's honor and reputation. Admit what you've done so we can heal and move forward together. The words landed one after another, each one heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to speak up. That isn't what happened, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I never brought any documents for her to change the will. I only helped with her health insurance forms and prescription refills. Dylan dismissed me instantly. Health forms. That's your story now, I pushed on. Grandma specifically asked me to handle those things because Sarah cut in with a skeptical scoff. Because you made sure you were the only one she asked. My father's stare hardened. We're not fools, Jenna. Drop the act. The isolation hit me hard. I looked around the room for any sign of doubt, any ally, but found none. Even Dylan, my little brother, looked at me like a stranger he despised. I was there because she was lonely and needed help. I said, my voice cracking slightly. I didn't expect or want anything in return. My mother laughed bitterly. That's the most ridiculous lie yet. No one spends that much time without expecting a payoff. Valerie sighed deeply. This is tearing the family apart even more. They kept coming at me, their voices overlapping, giving me no room to breathe or explain fully. Every attempt I made to defend myself was swatted away before I could finish a sentence. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the humiliation spreading through me like fire. These people had known me my entire life, raised me, shared holidays with me, and now they were dismantling me piece by piece without a second thought. Dylan took another step forward. "We all deserve the full truth before this will is finalized," Sarah added quickly. "And if Grandma wasn't competent, then anything signed under pressure shouldn't be valid anyway." My father nodded in agreement. "We'll challenge every part of this if necessary. The courts will see the manipulation clear as day." The threats echoed in the silent room. My hands trembled in my lap. I pressed them together to hide it, the sense of betrayal mixed with raw shame making it hard to even swallow. I tried one last time. "You're all making a terrible mistake. I loved her. That's the only reason I was there so often." My mother's response came swift and venomous. "Love doesn't forge signatures or rewrite legal documents." Valerie clasped her hands together. "Please just consider how this affects everyone else." The barrage continued, relentless and coordinated. I sat there trapped, surrounded by family yet utterly alone, watching my reputation crumble in real time. Finally, Mr. Ellison raised his hand slowly, palm facing outward. The gesture was simple, but carried enough authority to quiet the room. "I believe," he said calmly, "it is time to proceed with the remainder of the will." In the final years of her life, when Grandma Ruth first began experiencing mild Alzheimer's and forgetting small details more frequently. I worked as a nurse at a hospital only 20 minutes from her Silicon Valley mansion. My schedule allowed me to finish shifts in the late afternoon, so I started visiting regularly. At first, it was 3 or 4 times a week, but as her condition progressed, it became nearly every day. I used the spare key she had given me long ago. The security system would chime softly when I entered, and I would find her in the sunlit study or the large kitchen, sometimes staring at the same page of a book for minutes at a time. I cooked the meals she still recognized and enjoyed simple things like baked salmon with lemon-fresh salads from the garden she used to tend, or the chicken soup recipe she had perfected over decades. We ate together at the kitchen counter because the long, formal table felt too empty. Afterward, I organized her medications into the daily dispenser, checking labels carefully and marking off each dose. Evenings were for conversation. Grandma loved recounting her early days in the tech investment world. She described spotting promising startups when they were still operating out of garages, negotiating with venture capitalists who underestimated her because she was a woman, and the rush of seeing companies she backed go public. Her voice grew animated as she talked about specific deals, names of founders she mentored, risks that paid off hugely. I listened attentively, asking questions to keep her engaged, even when some stories repeated with slight variations. My parents visited infrequently. Alan and Cynthia would arrive perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, always dressed impeccably and full of updates about their own lives. Each visit inevitably circled to financial needs. One spring, it was seed money for a new property development Alan was confident would yield high returns. In the fall, Cynthia wanted funds to completely redesign their home's interior. Grandma listened patiently, then wrote the checks. I saw the fatigue in her eyes afterward, but she never refused them outright. Dylan behaved differently. He began showing up more often, usually with Sarah. He expressed concern about Grandma managing everything alone and offered to assist with financial paperwork or small accounts. He suggested it would ease her mind if someone younger helped track statements and bills. Grandma appreciated the gesture. She saw in him the same drive my father had at that age. One quiet afternoon in her study, she shared the combination to the built-in safe behind the bookshelf, explaining it was for emergencies and that she trusted him completely. I thought it was sweet at the time. Family, looking out for family. Then valuables started vanishing gradually. The pearl necklace Grandma saved for special occasions disappeared from its velvet box. A small modern painting, a gift from an early tech entrepreneur, went missing from the hallway wall. The antique pocket watch that had belonged to her late husband was no longer on the dresser. Grandma noticed. She would search drawers and cabinets, growing agitated. One evening after dinner, she pulled me aside. "My pearls are gone," she said, worry creasing her face. "I know I put them right here." We looked together, but they were nowhere. She shook her head. "Maybe I misplaced them." Weeks later, she brought it up again. "That little painting isn't on the wall anymore. And the watch? It's not where I always keep it." Her voice trembled slightly. "I offered to inventory everything or review the cleaning service records." She hesitated. "I have to be absolutely sure before pointing fingers," she told me quietly. "Especially when it involves blood. People can disappoint, but I won't accuse without proof." She never elaborated. She didn't mention her suspicions to my parents or anyone else. I assumed the confusion was part of the disease progressing, so I comforted her and redirected the conversation to happier topics. I never witnessed anything suspicious. My visits were mostly daytime or early evening. Dylan and Sarah came at other hours, often when Grandma napped or when I was at work. More items vanished over the following months. The diamond stud earrings she wore to board meetings. A rare signed first edition of a biography she cherished. Grandma eventually stopped searching, as actively accepting the losses with sad resignation. Her decline continued steadily. Some days she mixed up names or repeated questions every few minutes. Other days her mind cleared and she spoke sharply about current tech news or reminisced with perfect clarity. I requested more time off from the hospital, rearranging shifts to be available whenever possible. My parents phoned occasionally to ask how she was, but actual visits remained sparse. Dylan and Sarah still appeared periodically, bringing small, thoughtful gifts, like fresh flowers or a new audiobook. Grandma spent increasing hours resting. I read aloud from books about business pioneers she admired. We watched archived videos of conferences she had keynoted decades earlier. She often reached for my hand, holding it tightly when words escaped her. One evening, after I helped her into bed and adjusted the blankets, she looked at me with sudden lucidity. "Thank you for coming so often, Jenna," she whispered. "You're the only one who does it without needing something in return." I stayed until her breathing evened out, then lingered in the hallway outside her door, listening to the quiet of the big house. A short time later, she slipped away peacefully during the night. I arrived the next morning and found her in her favorite armchair by the large window facing the rolling hills she loved, as if she had simply fallen asleep watching the sunrise. I was the only one with her at the end, back in the living room with everyone still pushing me to admit everything right then and there, their voices sharp and unrelenting. Mr. Ellison rose from his chair without hurry. He walked to the side table, picked up a slim remote, and aimed it at the large flat screen on the wall. The screen woke up with a soft glow. "2 years ago," he said evenly, "Mrs. Ruth Burke instructed me to have the entire home security system upgraded." She had become concerned about valuables disappearing from the house. He clicked the remote. The display split into multiple camera views, each labeled with date and timestamps, all high definition. The first clip played. It showed the study at dusk. Dylan entered alone, glanced around, then keyed in the safe combination. The door opened. He removed the pearl necklace, carefully placed it in a small black pouch Sarah handed him from the doorway. They exchanged a quick look before leaving the room. Another clip, a different evening. Sarah stood watch at the study door while Dylan took out the antique pocket watch. He wrapped it in tissue and slipped it into his jacket pocket. A third sequence from the garage camera. Dylan carried a flat package wrapped in brown paper, the missing hallway painting, to Sarah's car. He placed it in the trunk, closed it gently, and they drove off. More footage appeared in quick succession. Dylan and Sarah inside a discreet pawn shop downtown. The clerk examined the diamond earrings under a lamp, nodded, and slid an envelope of cash across the counter. Sarah signed the form while Dylan scanned the room. Additional clips showed them returning home empty-handed, then later removing other items: a signed first edition book, a small jade figurine Grandma kept on her desk. The room had gone deadly quiet. Dylan's face lost all color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Sarah's hands flew to her cheeks as tears started streaming down. Mr. Ellison advanced to the next file. The screen now displayed a single screenshot, an old text message thread pulled from the house's synced backup system. The message from Alan to Cynthia read clearly, "As long as everyone suspects Jenna is the one manipulating things, we'll have the advantage when we challenge the will." The timestamp was from several months before Grandma passed. My father shot to his feet, finger pointing at the lawyer. "You can't ambush us with this. It's an invasion of privacy." Cynthia stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, color draining from her face. She said nothing. Dylan finally found his voice, but it came out shaky. "Those clips, they're taken out of context. Grandma told me I could borrow things if I needed." Sarah sobbed louder. "It was all a mistake. We were going to return everything. Please, it's just a misunderstanding." Mr. Ellison remained unmoved. The recordings were made on Mrs. Burke's private property with her explicit authorization. Everything is legal and properly documented. Valerie shifted uncomfortably in her seat but stayed silent, tissue twisted tightly in her hands. I sat frozen watching the evidence unfold. The accusations from minutes ago still echoed in my head, but now the tables had turned completely. Relief mixed with a deep, aching sadness as I realized how far my own family had gone. Alan tried again, voice rising. "Turn that off. We need to discuss this privately first." Mr. Ellison ignored the demand. He clicked the remote once more. The screen cleared, ready for the next file. Dylan leaned forward, desperation creeping in. "We can explain. Grandma trusted me with the code for a reason." Sarah wiped her eyes. "We never meant any harm. It was temporary." Cynthia finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "This isn't happening." The weight of the footage settled over the room like a heavy blanket. No one looked at me now. Their eyes stayed fixed on the screen or the floor. Mr. Ellison adjusted his stance slightly. "And this," he said quietly, "is the final message Mrs. Ruth wanted everyone to hear." The screen faded to a familiar sight, Grandma Ruth seated in her favorite armchair by the large window, the rolling Silicon Valley hills softly lit in the background. She wore the gray sweater I had seen her in so often, a light blanket draped over her lap. Her face showed the tiredness of her final months, but her eyes held the same determined clarity I remembered, and her voice, though weaker, came through steady and clear. "If you are watching this recording," she started, gazing straight into the camera, as if addressing each of us individually, "it means I am no longer here, and you have all gathered to hear my final wishes." She took a slow breath. "I want to begin with something important about Jenna." Hearing my name from her like that sent a wave through me. Jenna was the only one who stayed by my side with genuine heart until the very last moment. She didn't visit for gain or obligation. She came because she truly cared. She listened to my stories, helped with daily needs, and made the difficult days feel less lonely. That kind of devotion is rare, and it cannot be pretended. Grandma's eyes seemed to scan the room, resting on invisible faces. "To my son, Alan, and my daughter-in-law, Cynthia, your visits were few, and they almost always ended with requests for financial help. I provided because you are family, but I recognized long ago that money was the primary motivation. Your interest lay more in what I could give than in how I was doing." Alan looked away, jaw tight. Grandma continued without pause. "And to my grandson Dylan, I placed trust in you. I shared the safe combination because I wanted to believe in your responsibility. Yet you and Sarah used that access to remove items from my home over time, assuming I would not notice or could not prove it. I did notice." Dylan lowered his head further. Sarah's shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "I have been aware of these actions for quite some time," Grandma said. "That is why I arranged for the security upgrades, preserved relevant communications, and prepared this message. I wanted the facts to emerge cleanly without prolonged denial or conflict. She straightened slightly in the chair. Now, regarding the will itself. The primary residence, this house, the substantial technology investment portfolio I built over decades, and the contents of the main safe are left to Jenna Burke. I know she will manage them thoughtfully and perhaps direct resources toward causes we spoke about helping others in meaningful ways. Her expression warmed. I included a morality clause in the document 2 years ago, properly filed and registered with the court. Any beneficiary proven to have stolen property from me or engaged in attempts to undermine the will through deceit or manipulation automatically forfeits all rights to inheritance. The evidence presented today activates that clause fully. The words hung heavy in the room. Grandma looked back at the camera one last time, her voice softening. Jenna, you never sought wealth. You sought family and purpose. Use what I have passed to you to create something lasting and good. The recording ended. The screen returned to black. Silence gripped the room for several long seconds. Then the front door opened smoothly. 2 court-appointed officers in plain clothes entered carrying official folders. They had been scheduled to arrive at this exact time as part of the plan Grandma set in motion. Alan rose quickly. We will contest every part of this in court. That clause won't stand up to scrutiny. Cynthia found her voice. This feels forced, almost coercive. Dylan spoke up, strained. We'll hire our own attorneys and fight it. Sarah whispered through tears. None of this seems right. Valerie stayed seated, unusually quiet. Mr. Ellison opened another section of his briefcase and placed several certified documents on the table, court stamps visible on each page. These amendments, including the morality clause, were submitted, reviewed, and recorded 2 years ago, he explained calmly. California probate law recognizes and enforces them. All supporting evidence has already been forwarded to the appropriate authorities as required by the filing. The officers nodded confirmation and positioned themselves near the exits, ensuring no one tampered with devices or records. The threats lost momentum. Faces that had been defiant moments earlier now showed resignation or shock. Mr. Ellison turned to me and produced a cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. This is addressed to you personally, Jenna, he said softly. From your grandmother. My fingers trembled as I accepted it. Grandma's distinctive handwriting spelled my name across the front. I broke the seal carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter on her personal stationery, folded once. She had outlined a complete plan for a scholarship foundation supporting nursing students from low-income backgrounds, the exact dream I had shared with her during those quiet evenings. She included suggested board members' initial funding allocation from the portfolio, even a proposed name for the fund. Reading her words there in the same room where everything had just unraveled brought a rush of emotions I couldn't name. Gratitude, sorrow, resolve all at once. The officers remained in place. Mr. Ellison waited patiently. The truth had been delivered, irreversible and complete. 1 year later, the Silicon Valley mansion no longer carried that heavy atmosphere. I had made clean breaks. I blocked every number, email, and account linked to Alan, Cynthia, Dylan, and Sarah. No calls got through. No messages reached me. I changed the security codes and installed new protocols at the gate. When legal notices arrived from their side, my attorney handled them without involving me directly. Valerie sent one long text a few months after everything settled. It was full of apologies, explanations about feeling caught in the middle, and hopes we could talk someday. I read it once, then deleted it without replying. The house itself changed gradually. I kept Grandma's study and bedroom as they were, but I opened up other spaces. The formal areas that once felt cold became warmer with new purpose. I used part of the inheritance to establish the scholarship fund we had talked about. It focused on nursing students facing financial hardship, covering tuition, books, even living expenses for those who might otherwise drop out. I named it the Ruth Burke Nursing Foundation. The first launch event took place right in the old living room, the same space where the will reading had unfolded. I removed the heavy furniture and brought in folding chairs arranged in a circle. Recipients and their families filled the seats. Local journalists attended quietly. A few former colleagues from the hospital came to show support. I stood where Mr. Ellison once sat and spoke briefly about Grandma's belief in second chances and hard work. Then I announced the initial awards. Watching the students' faces light up as their names were called made the room feel entirely different, full of possibility instead of tension. Outside work on the foundation life settled into a quieter rhythm. I continued nursing part-time at the same hospital, keeping my skills sharp and staying connected to patients. The portfolio performed steadily under professional management, providing more than enough without demanding constant attention. News about the others reached me only through public records or mutual contacts I still trusted. Alan and Cynthia separated officially. The divorce stemmed from disputes over whatever assets remained outside the will. They sold their house and moved into separate, smaller places. Neither reached out again. Dylan and Sarah faced a civil lawsuit for the value of the items they took. The case dragged on, but ended with a judgment against them. They lost stable positions in the tech community. Word spread quickly in those circles. Last I heard, they had relocated to a different state, starting over with damaged reputations. Valerie kept a low profile. No further messages came. I didn't follow their lives closely. It wasn't about punishment, it was about boundaries. Some nights I walked through the house alone, stopping in Grandma's study. Her chair still sat by the window. I would sit there sometimes, looking out at the same hills she loved. The view hadn't changed, but everything else had. Greed doesn't just take money. It destroys bonds that seem unbreakable, parent to child, sibling to sibling, grandparent to grandchild. It turns trust into suspicion and love into leverage. I don't carry hatred. Anger faded into something closer to sadness for what could have been. Instead, I chose the peace Grandma intended. I live with what she left me: the resources to do good and the clarity to protect my own well-being. The foundation grows each year. More students receive help. The house hosts meetings and small events that bring positive energy through its doors. Grandma's legacy isn't the wealth alone. It's the lesson that real connection matters more than inheritance, and that decency in the end finds its own reward. I'm okay now. Truly okay.